everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Many of you have joined today because you're interested in the rapidly emerging field of precision medicine. And as we're all aware, more complex, expensive, and promising genetic and genomic tests are being developed to identify biomarkers that can help treatment and care, most prominently in the field of oncology. And today we're going to share the progress that has been made in standing up a time-limited advisory panel tasked with developing some consensus-based assessment frameworks to support standardized, efficient, and transparent assessment of genetic and genomic biomarkers in cancer care in Canada. At the end of the session today, we hope you'll understand the scope of this work and learn how you can provide feedback on the draft framework, which is anticipated to be available for your comments in July of this year, July 2025. My name's Tamara Rader, and I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm located in the area we now call Ottawa. It's the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And if you've ever been to this place, you really know how important the waterways are. The Ottawa River is especially to our geography. I live very close to the area where the Rideau River flows into the Ottawa River. And when I'm out walking along, enjoying the natural space, I'm reminded that the Anishinaabe people are the traditional keepers of the local watershed since before recorded history. So I encourage you all to reflect on the land where you're living right now, and we're glad to have participants here from across Canada and many beautiful places. So please feel free to share where you're located in the chat if you'd like to. And just as there are many beautiful places, there are also many excellent Indigenous organizations working to improve the lives of their community members. And to give a shout out to one organization near me, and as a personal act of reconciliation today, and every time I have a chance to give a land acknowledgement, I donate to Minwashin Lodge. It's a local Indigenous women's shelter and support center that provides a range of programs and services to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women and their children, regardless of their status, who are survivors of domestic and other forms of violence, and also might be suffering the effects of the residential school system. And I hope you agree with me that these small actions by individuals can have a big impact, just as these local Indigenous community organizations are having one. Today we'll be offering simultaneous interpretation and live captioning in both official languages. My colleagues, I think, have already put the link in the chat so that you can access this. And the link will open a new browser with the audio or captioning in your choice of English or French. And if you have any trouble, just reach out in the chat there to the CDA AMC events team, and they'll try and help you. Hopefully it's quite straightforward. Our speakers today are Robbie Spring and Laura Weeks. Laura is the Director of Health Technology Assessment in the Evidence Products and Services Department of Canada's Drug Agency. And Robbie Spring is a member of our advisory panel on the framework to assess cancer biomarkers. She brings a professional and personal interest to the topic. Robbie, would you like to begin?
Sure, thanks, Tamara. I'm honored to be here and to be able to contribute to this important work. I joined this panel because I've seen firsthand what it means when access to biomarker testing is fragmented and inconsistent. As a cancer survivor and someone who has supported my mom, dad, and sister through cancer, I know the feeling of uncertainty, wondering if the right tests were done, if the treatment was personalized. I've met too many patients who later found out there was a test or a targeted treatment they could have received but didn't, sometimes because of where they live, sometimes because of the clinician, and sometimes because they didn't know they had to ask. From a patient's perspective, the promise of precision medicine is incredibly helpful. We're seeing the development of complex, expensive, and effective genetic and genomic tests that can identify biomarkers and inform treatment. For many, these tests represent the difference between a treatment that works and one that doesn't. But while science is moving forward, the systems patients rely on to access these technologies are lagging behind. Right now, the way biomarkers are assessed and how their associated therapies are evaluated is not aligned. These systems were not built for the pace or complexity of what's coming. So we have promising tests and targeted treatment, but no consistent process to evaluate them together. That's a gap, and from where I sit, it's a gap that hits patients the hardest. Another challenge is the inconsistency in how different provinces and territories approach oncology biomarker testing. In Canada, where you live still determines what care you receive. And in the case of precision medicine, that can mean delays or denials of tests that could change treatment options or even survival outcomes. Patients are increasingly informed. We know these tests exist, and we are frustrated when our own system hasn't caught up with the innovation we are reading about or seeing in other settings. I know this has been frustrating for me and the other three direct members of my family who have had inequitable access to biomarker testing. That's why I'm so glad CDA is engaging in this space. These are complex problems, but they're not insolvable. And this panel is a meaningful step towards progress. I also want to highlight how important it is that the panel includes two patient representatives. We are equal members of the panel, applying both our lived experience and relevant professional backgrounds in a meaningful manner. Too often, patients are brought in late or not at all, but those of us who've lived it know where the system breaks down. Our insights don't always show up in the data, but they're critical to building something that works for the people it's meant to serve. I'm encouraged that this is also a consensus based process. In an area as nuanced as biomarker testing, no single perspective is enough. We need science, policy, clinical experience, and lived experience working together. My hope is that the framework we're building will support a more standardized, transparent, and efficient approach to assessing biomarkers across the country, one that helps decision makers act with clarity and ensures that every patient, regardless of geography, has timely access to the testing that could guide their care. I'm also hoping that this work leads directly to patients and patient communities being more involved and having a streamlined approach to help get biomarkers approved and implemented in a clear and consistent and quick manner. This is an important step. It's not going to fix everything, but aligning how we assess biomarkers is foundational to making precision medicine a reality for more people more equitably. We can't improve access if we don't first align on what we're assessing and how. I'm hopeful for what we're building. Thanks for having me here today.
Well, thanks, Robbie, and thanks for your work on this advisory panel and your words today. I totally agree that there's some things that only we can only learn from people with that direct experience, and I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing today what this work means to you and the wider community as well. Um, Laura, can I call on you next to share a bit more about the work of the advisory panel, maybe the progress to date and the plans for the next few months?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tamara. And thank you, Robbie, as well, for offering your very insightful perspectives on this important issue. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you as part of the advisory panel and to represent the work here today as well. Um, I also want to extend thank you to everyone who was able to join the webinar today. We appreciate your time and your interest to hear more about our work to support the development of a consensus-based assessment framework for decisions around the adoption and funding for biomarker testing in cancer care. To set the stage, as Tamara and Robbie have both already alluded, we have entered the age of precision medicine. We're seeing more complex drug treatments emerge that are tailored for individuals with particular genetic or genomic profiles. And increasingly, an understanding of individuals' genetic makeup are now informing a range of therapeutic decisions. So it's a really exciting time in care where we have the potential to observe enhanced patient outcomes and reduce adverse effects by offering targeted therapies to the right person at the right time. That said, precision medicine is a process and it requires not only safe, effective, targeted therapies, but we also require access to biomarker testing to determine an individual's genetic profile, for example, and to identify who might be eligible or not for different targeted therapies, and otherwise to tailor treatments based on genetic information. And it is only when this process comes together that we can realize the potential benefits of precision medicine. Our systems at the moment do expose some potential gaps within this process, and that's the primary driver for the work that we will discuss together today. I'm sure most or all of you on this call are aware that in Canada, we have a relatively defined process that guides regulatory and reimbursement decisions for novel drug therapies. but that's not necessarily the case for the associated testing requirements that support the appropriate use of these novel drug therapies. So to inform our work, wait for a couple, one more slide back, please. One more back. No, this isn't the anticipated slide. That's okay. It would be slide 5. But that's fine. To inform our work, so we conducted an environmental scan, and these are the results that are displayed on this screen. So this was published earlier in March of this year. As part of the work, we were looking at existing assessment practices, criteria, and frameworks used across the country. And as part of the work, identified that processes vary across our different provincial and territorial jurisdictions, and even at times within jurisdictions. We learned that many or all jurisdictions acknowledge the need for a process to inform the assessment of biomarkers to inform their adoption and funding, but that some are further ahead than others in their implementation of such a process. We heard that there are common challenges across jurisdictions. For example, that there are typically different funders and different decision makers that support decisions around the targeted therapies, for example, novel drug therapies, and the biomarker testing requirements. And these systems are not always aligned or coordinated. And why this matters, and as Robbie most eloquently put forward, is that it can limit access, it can limit timely access, it can limit equitable access to novel drug treatments and other targeted therapies, and therefore limiting equitable opportunities to experience the potential benefits of precision medicine. And so it's within this context that we have stood up our advisory panel, who are supporting the development of a consensus-based assessment framework to help inform decisions about the funding and adoption of various biomarkers beginning in cancer care. So this is the primary objective of the advisory panel. They also have secondary objectives to share best practice and learn from one another, to support implementation of the framework within jurisdictions once it's ready, and to do as we're doing today, and that's ensure that interested parties are engaged across jurisdictions to build consensus. I will have a more detailed timeline slide in a minute, but just wanted to flag for now that we do anticipate the framework to be ready for implementation within jurisdictions in the fall of this year, targeting beginning those conversations in September. I also wanted to give a shout out and thanks to all of our advisory panel members who have been nothing short of an engaged and thoughtful group. When identifying members, we were very intentional in our approach to identify people with a diversity in roles and perspectives across the health system, while ensuring diversity across jurisdictions and other dimensions of difference, but also a manageable panel size. So in total, we were able to engage 14 members, including a chair, and we also have an observer from INES, which is the HTA organization in Quebec. On this slide, I wanted to describe some of what was considered in and out of scope for the panel. For example, the panel considered all type of biomarkers to be in scope, so including predictive and prognostic markers, those that might be used to detect disease recurrence or to monitor treatment response, and inclusive as well of both germline and hereditary mutations. We also intend the framework to support decisions about biomarker testing that is not yet standard of care, so for these new and novel biomarkers, but also to support decisions around existing biomarker testing. So there could be the potential to revisit decisions around the appropriate use of existing tests, or to potentially reassess or support decisions about tests that might be used for a particular indication for their use in a new indication. We do not intend the framework to support any decisions about the location of testing. So, for example, whether that testing were to happen within a province or whether a test should be sent out of the jurisdiction for testing. We will be presenting assessment criteria to assess biomarkers, but the framework is not intended to support any recommendations around how to conduct that testing, using what platforms or assays, for example. We do acknowledge that these decisions are very much based on local context and what might currently be available or possible within specific jurisdictions. Last, we do expect the framework may lead to the identification of some implementation considerations, but we wouldn't expect implementation rules or requirements to flow from the framework, again, acknowledging those primarily as within jurisdictional context. And on that note, so just to clarify as well, that the framework is intended at the moment to be implemented within different jurisdictions, adopted within existing processes, with the goal to support a more coordinated or consistent approach between jurisdictions. So we at Canada's Drug Agency are supporting the development of the framework from a pan-Canadian level, acknowledging the challenges that we've introduced or discussed here today from a consistency, transparency, and equity lens, but the scope is for the jurisdictions to implement the final product. And last, before opening the floor to hear your questions and comments, I'll just provide an overview of the process that the advisory panel is taking to support framework development. So first, we have scheduled a 4 almost monthly meeting. So we began meeting late in February, and the last meeting is fast approaching at the beginning of June. For each of these meetings, Canada's Drug Agency staff has developed a set of meeting materials to support the advisory panel discussions, um, building from input received from the panel throughout the course of the work. And the meetings and the content really have built from one another, progressing through a discussion of scope and current practices and opportunities to learn from one another to a draft framework and working towards a final draft in early June. We do acknowledge the diversity and interested parties really relevant to this nuanced area of biomarker assessment, as Robbie put it, and want to provide ample opportunity to hear from everyone with an interest. And so we do intend to have an extended feedback period over the course of the summer months, after which we will revise the draft based on the feedback received before finalizing the framework in September and begin shifting the conversation to one of implementation of the framework within jurisdictions. So with that, I will close the formal presentation component of our discussion and open the floor to hear from you. So thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. Lots of good information there, and I see some interest in the slides afterwards as well.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have any questions, speaking to the audience, you can please go ahead and use the Q&A feature. It's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our moderator will review and pose selected questions, that'll be me, to the speakers during the Q&A portion. So you can feel free to submit those questions anytime through the session. And we also welcome you to contact us after the meeting if your question doesn't get answered. And I'll provide the email at the end of the session. Just prepare that now. There's a question about your slide, Laura, about the map. I think it was when you were discussing the environmental scan. Did the colors have any significance?
Well, good question. No, not in particular. I think the point I was trying to make through the use of different colors is just a different color for each jurisdiction, that each jurisdiction currently does have very different processes in terms of the assessment of biomarkers.
Great. Another question, just in terms of who will CDA AMC engage with when it comes to that point of implementation within the jurisdictions? No, not necessarily in scope for today, but yeah, if you
No,
have any comment on that.
Sure. No, I think that's an excellent question. Again, I will just point back that the implementation will be a jurisdictional priority as the different jurisdictions decide or not to take up the framework. And so those sorts of questions around engagement primarily would rest within the jurisdictional processes. That said, when developing the the framework, we do have a set of guiding principles, and I anticipate that engagement with relevant interested parties will be a component of those guiding principles and would support the implementation as well.
Thanks, Laura. And I'm not sure if you can comment on the relative readiness of the different provinces, but which ones are I guess the question is about more advanced, but not necessarily to compare provinces, but are there any that would stand out to you?
Yeah, that's sort of a tough question, and some of you on the call might be familiar with Don Husserl's current report on health system readiness for genomic testing. I think one of the interpretations, I think, of the first iteration of that report is provinces are approaching this issue quite differently. But I think at the same time, it's not necessarily fair. I think, just Tamara, as you've pointed, to compare provinces to another. I think provinces with more resources would necessarily have different processes than provinces with fewer resources. So I don't necessarily want to offer a comparison of one versus the other. And I think what has been really insightful as the advisory panel has gathered was really focusing on the second objective, which was to learn from one another. And so I think each province has a lot to offer in terms of best practice. And this has been a nice opportunity for jurisdictions to learn from another and kind of put together some recommendations for what a consistent process could look like at a pan-Canadian level, kind of drawing from those best practices across jurisdictions.
Thanks, Laura. A question from the chat about how, once this process is in place, how will it be communicated to patients and caregivers? I suppose we could comment on how CDA AMC will contact people, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So the intention is obviously to share the draft framework, and we will have some minutes to talk about that before we close the session today. The draft framework with all interested parties through our social media channels and otherwise. When the draft is ready, sort of encouraging people to provide feedback on the draft. But then once the final version is ready, again, we would follow similar processes to spread the word across interested parties and through our social media and other publication channels, just to be sure everyone is aware when the final product is available. What we haven't discussed and would be interested to hear from this group as well is, should we have a webinar series as well when the draft is ready? So if that's something that would be of interest to the patient community when we do have that final version, that's certainly something we can take back.
Yes, thanks, Laura. And yes, please do put your comments in any way you'd like to let us know that. I have a question about the technology required for specific biomarker tests. The question is, does the framework being developed also assess the testing method and any specific instrumentation or technology that's required? The person who posed this sees us as one of the potential barriers to equitable access, because if a new test can only be performed by a new instrument from a specific company or place.
Okay, no, that's a fantastic question. We have intentionally stayed away from the specifics of how to test because we have very much heard that how the testing is implemented is really context dependent. So depending on the infrastructure and resources that are available within different jurisdictions. So we have been asked to stay away from those particular conversations.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question. I see there's some later clarification, but
Oh, sure. No,
definitely.
yeah, please feel free to ask if there's a clarifying question, feel free to ask me, Tamara.
It says, I see test platform or assay as out of scope, and I suppose the person is looking for some more added context.
Yeah, I guess I'm not too sure how else to elaborate, and there just the how. So
Hmm.
we have
Sure.
kind of left the framework at the stage where we will say there is value in testing for a particular biomarker, but leaving the implementation of those particular jurisdictions to implement.
Yes, there's a question here about other areas. So, and I also have a question about the framework is intended only to support the assessment of cancer biomarkers, this particular framework that you're working on.
Mhm.
What plans are there to support decision making for other types of biomarkers in other purposes or conditions?
No, that's a great question. So at the moment, yeah, the framework is intended to support decisions on cancer biomarkers specifically. We had to start somewhere, and just thinking of how the different jurisdictions are organized in terms of I guess, funding mechanisms and models and these sorts of things. We were trying not to boil the ocean, but develop something that's practically feasible. And certainly, we see most of the emerging biomarkers at the moment are in the field of cancer care. And so we did want to start there to begin to have a meaningful impact, but then do anticipate that there will be lots of lessons learned as we approach the assessment of cancer biomarkers that can later be applied to different fields.
Thanks, Laura. And a comment that your previous answer was perfect. So thank you for that.
Okay. Okay.
There's one question. It's clear that biomarkers and genetic testing have tremendous potential value in treatment. However, they do typically have a high cost. How's the cost benefit analysis done? And is this a major consideration when making recommendations on what tests to fund?
Yeah, so this, I think to answer this question, I'll have to ask to stay tuned until the framework is ready. It won't be a surprise, I think, to anyone that the issue of cost will come up within the framework, but the specifically how, we'll have to wait until the draft is ready and the panel has the opportunity to meet at June one last time to finalize the draft. Um, yeah, and yeah, I think I just have to leave it there
Mhm.
because I think yeah, we're having conversations, but nothing's necessarily been finalized yet. But of course, cost will be a consideration.
Yeah, more to come in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Here's a question. Will consideration be given to broader panel testing, e.g. CGP? I'm sorry, I don't have this acronym spelled out,
That's okay.
compared to point mutation testing in an effort to prepare for the future? And this is asked in alignment with Robbie's perspective about science moving forward, but systems patients rely on falling behind.
Yeah, absolutely. So CGP, comprehensive genomic profiling. So this, yeah, I think Robbie summarized it quite well. This is, sort of the future, and the work that we have ahead of us is to ensure our systems can catch up to the advancements in technologies. The work that we are doing right now is will be very individual to specific individual biomarkers, but again, leaving the how to the jurisdictions. And some jurisdictions, if they have capacity or make a decision to implement testing for biomarkers as part of a panel, then that would be within their purview. I think this is a place to start, though. I think this is a very important step to bringing forward decision making around biomarkers, but realizing again, it's the first step and there is
Yeah.
more to go. So I would see the CGP being a future conversation. And Robbie,
I'll add in,
please
yeah,
jump
I'll
in.
just
Yeah.
add in because it's something that like we've spoken about in meetings and I'm aware of. And I see Alan on here and he certainly taught me a lot about CGP and it's important. But my perspective is like this isn't going to be the solve, but it's the first step in the right direction to having system readiness. And we're just not ready right now. And so without this work as like foundational, then hopefully we'll get to that. I'm hopeful that we'll get to that place by doing this first step. But I see that perspective.
Great. Thanks, Robbie.
There's a question, is there any intention to highlight how the lack of the framework, the lack of a current framework impacts the work of CDA-AMC through inequitable access to clinical trials or a barrier to uptake to clinical trials? Is there a comment you could make on that, Laura?
So is there a comment to make? Just I didn't write it down.
Yeah, no,
So
that's okay. Let
comment
me
to,
go
to make
back to
about
it.
how lack of a framework is impacting the work of CDA
Of
AMC.
CDA-AMC, yes.
So maybe I will interpret that to mean the work that we do in terms of our drug reimbursement review processes. Hopefully that's
Possibly, yeah.
an accurate interpretation. And again, feel
Yeah,
free.
yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
there's
Okay,
clarification there.
perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that that really is the cornerstone of why we're doing the work. Biomarker testing is sort of the precursor to access to the novel drug therapies that our reimbursement review committees are making recommendations on. And without a consistent framework, it is exactly leading to inequitable and lack of timely access to tests. So I think it's impacting the work that we do downstream. So if we make a reimbursement recommendation about the drug, but we don't have the testing in place, that's a clear gap. And that's really where we are trying to step in with this framework to elevate the conversation and ensure that testing considerations are considered when making reimbursement recommendations about the drugs. I will maybe also highlight some work that we've been doing alongside the development of the framework, and that's what we have called our testing procedure assessment program. So these are reports that we've been pulling together for about a year now. So when drugs come through for reimbursement recommendation and they have a companion diagnostic associated, my team will also pull together a report that we're calling testing procedure assessments, or TPAs. And what we intend to do with these reports is to provide a structured assessment of the testing requirements to support access to the drug therapies. So these reports are going alongside the reimbursement review reports to our expert review committees, and they deliberate based on this information as well when making drug reimbursement review recommendations. And so we have seen some considerations for testing requirements appear in our reimbursement recs as well for these drugs with companion diagnostics. And so we're trying to use this to, I guess, fill the gap, I think, that the participant has highlighted, um, given that we don't have a current assessment framework for testing requirements. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I hope that does. Thank you, Laura. That's good information about the other programs and the other work in the area right now. There's a couple of questions about the landscape and current practices and gaps. And I just wanted to let the participants know that Chinedu, our scientific colleague, has put a link to the environmental scan on in the chat there. So if you have any questions about the current landscape, you can start with that. I think that would be like a good summary of part of the work that's helping to inform the panel. Is there a consideration for disclosure to patients about what gene biomarkers they have been tested, so they can determine if they want to personally pay for the full panel?
Oh, yeah.
So I guess this is a knowledge translation question, but go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is certainly without outside of the scope of the conversations that we've been having both within the organization for the assessment framework and otherwise, realizing that this is more of a conversation, I believe, between clinicians and patients. But a complex question around what to test and what to disclose, in particular if test results aren't actionable. But yes, recommendations around those sorts of conversations are without not within our scope.
Great. There's another comment here, comment/question, which I will read out, Laura, and you can let me know if we can comment at this time.
Sounds good.
The ability to overcome provincial jurisdictional issues and coordinate on the approval of COVID vaccines on an emergency basis has been solidly established. So I guess this person is like pulling on previous experiences and observations. If cancer was communicable, there is now no question that CDA would coordinate on an emergency basis to expedite the framework. And the question is, given that an advanced cancer diagnosis is absolutely a patient emergency, can CDA AMC incorporate an expedited approach to the process so that more patients can gain access to this appropriate testing?
I really appreciate that comment, and I hope that the participants can see by engaging in this area and moving forward on the biomarker assessment, we are really trying to elevate the conversation that needs to happen within jurisdictions. I can't speak to the emergency, nature of it for sure. We do realize this is a big priority area, and this is why we are dedicating the time and resources to move forward the conversation.
Thanks, Laura. There's a question, how will the framework help to prepare for the increasing number of biomarkers relevant to tumor types?
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, why this conversation is coming to the fore, because we do realize there is an increasing pipeline of novel therapies that have testing requirements. And without this framework, without these processes in place, then we will continue to be challenged with timely and equitable access. And so this is the start of the conversation. This is moving that forward so that we are able to accelerate decisions around the appropriate use of testing.
That's great. I see a question about the patient community, many members are on the call with us today. How can patient community members provide feedback along the way and as well as stay informed? And I know that in the last 10 minutes or so of the webinar, we'll be explaining how that everyone who has an interest can provide feedback. And also right now on our website, there is an open form that you can fill out, a statement of interest if you are interested in this topic area. And I'll find that link and put it in the chat for everyone. And I encourage you. I've been keeping in touch with about 100 people so far who've filled out that statement of interest. It's a very good way to let us know that you're interested. And there's more to come on that piece for sure.
I think, I think
Oh,
you've summarized that quite well. I don't know if Robbie, if you had anything to add. I mean, we've been trying to include the patient voice throughout the development of this work by including Robbie and another panel member, Eric, in the work as well. But we realize there's more voices to hear, and that's why we have this bigger engagement plan over the summer. But
We
Robbie,
do.
anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that I'm advocating for and obviously feel strongly about. And that's also why I'm here today. And so, figuring out as many ways to integrate patient perspectives as possible and keep everyone informed, along with integrating your feedback. And so, if there's other thoughts you have, like feel free to like LinkedIn me or contact me directly. Like I've been in touch with the patient communities that I'm work closely with, but I'm also happy to speak with anyone as well because I want to make sure that when I'm in the meetings that I'm representing as many patient communities and patient voices as possible.
thanks, Robbie. And I guess, Laura, do you want to speak now about how the feedback will be used when people are able to give it in the summertime?
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, we intend to bring all of the feedback to the advisory panel. So, who will gather again once the feedback period closes in September, who will consider all of the feedback before making a final draft. So, we do want everyone to be aware that we will be looking at all of the feedback received and considering that as before we move to finalize the draft. I can say this now and repeat it again later. That's fine. I think for issues of transparency or reasons of transparency as well, we do intend to publish all of the feedback received. So we won't name individual names, but we would name organizations or groups that provide feedback. So just as a means for people to be aware of what we have heard and hopefully to see feedback reflected as appropriate within the final draft.
Thanks, Laura. And at the end, we'll give more information about the process for that. A question here. Well, while the implementation of this sits within the jurisdictions, will CDA AMC take a leadership role in convening opportunities for jurisdictions to meet and discuss the framework and have those knowledge exchanging opportunities? Perhaps beyond a webinar and social media, but something more active, a conference, for example.
No, that's a fantastic question. We certainly have heard interest from jurisdictions and other parties for Canada's Drug Agency to continue to play a convening role at bringing together pan-Canadian interests outside of the scope at the moment for the assessment framework, but that is feedback that we have heard and are considering within the organization how to best respond to. So definitely stay tuned. And if you're looped in with us in terms of our social posts or weekly dispatch or other communications, we certainly will be providing updates as we progress in this work through those channels.
That's great. And there's a similar question also about if we have any plans to work with the provinces on implementation issues, maybe bringing provinces together to share their experiences.
Yeah, yeah. And we have considered the issue of doing pilots and these sorts of things to see what that might look like. But again, that's more of a next step. So thanks for that feedback. It's important for us to hear these ideas so we can take them back to consider.
A question about maybe can you comment a bit on the barrier or within the healthcare system for making these tests available?
Yeah,
Many,
I mean,
yeah.
I think it's hard to point to any one thing, I suppose. I think it's just, our systems were developed at a different time and, technologies have changed and now's the time for our systems to keep up. I think some of the barriers I did reference in my introductions, just different processes, different decision makers, different budgets to inform testing decisions as recommendations or decisions around drugs and other therapies. And so I think the work ahead of us is to convene and share best practice and see where it makes sense to coordinate across jurisdictions, while of course respecting, I guess, jurisdictional bounds for um, establishing a healthcare system that works for their particular jurisdiction as well. So.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for reiterating that. And then a kind of a similar question that's related to the role of industry and private industry. Matching a patient's molecular profile with therapeutics means that pharma needs to apply to CDA-AMC on genomic indications rather than or in addition to tissue of origin. What role does pharma have within the proposed CDA-AMC framework?
Okay, no, a great question. And I think, again, one that we will need to hold off until we have the draft framework ready. We do acknowledge the pharmaceutical industry as a key player in this discussion. We did have an information session for our industry partners a couple of days ago and are anticipating feedback from them on the draft when available. Yeah, and we'll continue to keep them engaged in those conversations to ensure we're developing a system that works for everybody.
Thanks, Laura. Will the framework consider and address the challenges related to healthcare human resources and the impact of shortages on timely turnaround? And I think there was another question similar about lab technician availability.
Okay, yeah, and isn't this a relevant question across so many facets of our health system at the day? Again, though, I think I need to pull back to this being implemented within the jurisdictions and the available infrastructures that are available in those particular contexts with each jurisdiction, having different capacity and strengths and demands in terms of different health human resource requirements. So the implementation, the how of any recommendations around testing, it does rest within provinces and territories.
Great, thank you. Yeah, hopefully that answers both the questions that had to do with readiness when it comes to health and health human resources.
Mhm.
I'm just going to scan here, get my own question.
It's great to see so many questions coming
Yeah,
in.
it's really wonderful. And you mentioned how the feedback will be used, and I think that that's helpful for people, and how it'll be used by decision makers too. I think we've answered that one. So, will CDA AMC implement? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question about implementation. Will CDA AMC be implementing the new framework in conjunction with PCODER or another team implementing the framework? So maybe that's a clarification again about how it fits with our reimbursement reviews. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's certainly a nuanced area. So again, so we'll be developing the framework that's going to be implemented within the jurisdiction. So much the same as, PCODER currently is making recommendations for drug reimbursement decisions. Those are up to the provinces to take up and implement. However, they decide, and the assessment framework for biomarkers is intended to have a similar role within the jurisdictions around the biomarker component of the testing. So I hope that begins to answer some of the questions, but I'll make reference back again to the testing procedure assessment program that we have established as another mechanism to support these types of decisions, in particular in the interim, by providing a more structured assessment of the testing procedure assessments that go to our expert review committee, so like our PERC and our CDEC when making drug reimbursement review decisions. And it's our intention to refine our approach to testing procedure assessments based on the assessment framework when that is ready as well. So hopefully that will bring some consistency as well. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I think that ties it very nicely to the reimbursement review process. But as always, if we didn't get to your question or you need more detail, at the end we'll be sharing how you can get in touch so that we can follow up. Again, something that probably is still to come, but a question, given that CDA, AMC has only the power of recommendation, then that means there's substantial inequities in treatment processes between the provinces. And I think that's the problem that we're trying to solve. What are the solutions to deal with these inequities?
Uh, that's a very big question.
Yeah,
um,
certainly
and
is.
And I think again, these are just some of the steps that we're doing to move in that direction. Currently, we see inequities or differences, lack of transparency in these processes, and by bringing people together, by proposing a more standardized consensus framework, the intention is to kind of bring that consistency across, hopefully reduce inequities moving forward. So at least the same process could be used across jurisdictions to support the same type of decision.
Thanks, Laura. Um, and there is a question about whether CDA AMC will be making reimbursement recommendations of these tests, but I think we've answered that earlier.
Currently out of scope, something to consider as a future step. Yeah.
Yes. And a question about whether there's an international component to the framework where Canada would benefit from having access to international data.
Yeah, great question. And again, something that the advisory panel has been considering as we develop the draft, and we'll need to stay tuned to once that draft is finalized. Typically, within our assessments, we do a look to see what other jurisdictions are doing and sort of report that back to inform decisions. So it wouldn't surprise me if it shows up, but I'm not. Yeah, we haven't reached those decisions yet.
Great. So questions are slightly slowing down now, but I want to invite everyone to continue to ask them, and we may not, well, we won't talk about them at the moment, but we can certainly like reply to you if you would like a reply. And also in a moment when we talk about the next steps, you'll know how you can get in touch and continue the conversation. So thank you very much for these questions, this rich discussion. You've certainly given us a lot to consider, and just for me personally, hearing your perspectives really gives me a different angle on the problem, and it has been very informative just hearing your thoughts. Um, Laura, would you like to share what to expect in the coming months? So I think there's a next slide to discuss. Yes, great.
Sure, absolutely. So while the slide's coming up, I will thank everyone very much for the thoughtful questions. And yeah, again, as Tamara has said, we do welcome any afterwards as well that we were unable to answer today. So I will just provide a quick overview of the feedback opportunity on the draft framework. And again, we anticipate this to take place over the summer months. So I did mention previously that the panel is meeting for their final meeting on June 5th. And after that, we will be working to refine the draft based on that conversation and make a draft available to support the feedback opportunity. We do anticipate that the feedback period will open in early July. We will announce the opportunity through our regular channels, our weekly dispatch, our social media posts. And so if you're not already part of these distribution lists, I encourage you to visit our webpage to sign up. And there's great information on how to do that on the current slide so that you can be informed when the feedback period does open. In terms of process, so if you are familiar with how we typically collect feedback at the organization or not, how it works is that we will be sharing a document. It will have line numbers on it to support the provision of feedback. You'll be able to download that document separately. And then there will be a web-based form where we'll have some predefined questions that we would like to hear from folks on, and ample space to provide any comments that you might have on the draft. I did mention, but just to reiterate, that all feedback we receive will be shared with the advisory panel before finalizing the framework. And again, to support transparency, we do want to make publicly available any feedback that we do receive, identifying groups or organizations that provide feedback, but not specifying any individual names. We're hoping that, we've extended the feedback period. Typically, we have 2-week feedback period. We know there's a broad group of interested parties. So we are hoping that having a longer feedback period, especially over the summer of 2 months, will provide ample opportunity for everyone to review and to comment on the draft. So again, really encourage you to stay engaged if you're interested, and we would really look forward to hearing your comments at that time.
Thanks, Laura. Robbie, can I call on you? Do you have any final thoughts or reflections on the discussion today?
Um, just feel free. Like, I want to integrate as many perspectives as possible, and I'm happy to hear from everyone in order to do that, to make sure this work is really reflective and heading in the right direction that we need as patients. And then talking about like communication and how, as patient communities, we can take this work and either advocate or disseminate it is something that we speak about in the meetings as well. So it is top of mind.
Thanks a lot, Robbie. That's very generous of you to ask, and I fully agree. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Like Laura and Robbie, I'm just so happy to see such a wide interest in this work. As Laura said, just sign up, visit the website to sign up for those updates if you want. The recording of this webinar will be on our YouTube channels shortly, and we'll be emailing everyone who registered with a link to that recording once the webinar is available. We'd also be interested in your thoughts about today's session, so an evaluation survey will be sent out. And so if you could take a couple of minutes to complete that, that'll really help us for future events, especially if we decide to do another webinar closer to the time of completion of this framework. And lastly, just thank you all for attending and engaging with us today. And if you'd like, to be in touch with me or anybody, just send us a mail at the requests email. Thanks so much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, everyone, for your time.